The crystal caves of Valdris Planet made strange sounds at night. Emma Walsh had heard the stories from other scientists, but she never believed them until now. Deep underground, with only her flashlight cutting through the darkness, she could hear something that sounded almost like singing. The walls around her sparkled with natural crystals that grew in impossible shapes, twisting and turning like frozen music. Emma worked as a xenobiologist for the Terran Research Station. Her job was to study alien life forms, but after 6 months, on Valdris, she had found nothing more exciting than glowing moss and tiny insects that ate rocks. The planet seemed mostly empty, which was why the research team picked it as a safe place to set up their base. Safe and boring, Emma often thought to herself. Today was different, though. Her equipment had picked up some unusual readings from the deepest part of the cave system. The energy signatures looked like nothing in her database. Dr. Hayes, the station director, had told her to investigate but warned her not to go too far alone. Emma promised to be careful, but her curiosity was stronger than her fear. The singing sound grew louder as she went deeper. It was not quite music and not quite animal noise, but something in between. Emma's heart beat faster as she followed, the sound through narrow passages that opened into larger chambers. The crystals here were different too. They pulsed with soft light, almost like they were breathing. After an hour of walking through the underground maze, Emma reached a chamber, unlike anything she had ever seen. The ceiling stretched high above her head, covered in crystals that glowed with every color she could imagine. But it was not the crystals that made her gasp and drop her equipment bag. In the center of the chamber, curled up on a bed of soft, crystal formations, was a creature that should not exist. The dragon was no bigger than a house cat, but Emma knew immediately what she was looking at. The scales that covered its small body shifted colors like oil on water, moving from deep blue to silver to gold as it breathed. Its wings were folded against its sides, delicate and translucent like butterfly wings, but stronger looking. The creature's head was elegant and intelligent, with large eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom despite its obviously young age. Emma had studied the old records. Every human child grew up hearing stories about dragons, and when humans first went to space, they found that many alien worlds had similar legends, but the astral dragons were supposed to be gone. The few historical accounts said they had been hunted to extinction over 1,000 years ago by various alien species who feared their psychic abilities. Yet here one was, sleeping peacefully in a crystal cave on a planet that was supposed to be uninhabited. Emma approached slowly, trying not to make any noise. The dragon's breathing was steady and calm, and she could see that it was very young, probably just a baby. Its scales were not fully developed, and there was something fragile about the way it curled up, like it was trying to stay warm and safe. As she got closer, Emma noticed something that made her heart ache. The little dragon was alone. There were no signs of adult dragons anywhere in the chamber, no nests or territories marked out. This baby was completely by itself in the vast cave system. The dragon's eyes opened suddenly, and Emma froze. She expected it to be afraid, to fly away or attack her. Instead, it looked at her with curiosity. Its eyes were the most beautiful thing Emma had ever seen, like looking at stars through deep water. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, the dragon made a soft sound, almost like a question. Emma slowly sat down on the cave floor, making herself smaller and less threatening. She had worked with enough animals to know that sudden movements were always a bad idea. The dragon watched her carefully, tilting its small head from side to side. Then it did something that surprised Emma completely. It stood up, stretched its tiny wings, and walked toward her. The dragon stopped just out of reach and sat down, continuing to watch Emma with those incredible eyes. Emma could feel something strange happening, like there was a gentle pressure in her mind. It was not painful or scary, just different. She had the odd feeling that the dragon was trying to understand her, to figure out what kind of person she was. Without thinking, Emma reached into her pack and pulled out her lunch sandwich. She was not even hungry anymore, but she tore off a small piece and placed it on the ground between them. The dragon looked at the food, then back at Emma. It took a cautious step forward and sniffed the sandwich piece. After a moment, it ate the food and made what sounded like a happy chirping noise. Emma smiled despite herself. This legendary creature, this being that was supposed to be extinct and dangerous, was acting like any young animal meeting a friendly stranger. She offered another piece of sandwich, and the dragon came even closer to take it. This time, when it ate, Emma felt a warm feeling in her chest, like happiness that was not quite her own. As they shared the simple meal, Emma began to understand that she was experiencing something incredible, not just because she had found a species that was thought to be extinct, but because this little dragon was trying to communicate with her. The warm feelings, the sense of curiosity and friendliness that seemed to come from outside her own mind, these were the dragon's emotions somehow reaching her. By the time Emma's equipment started beeping with low battery warnings, the dragon had moved close enough that she could have touched it if she wanted to. She did not try, knowing that trust had to be earned slowly. Instead, she stood up carefully and shouldered her pack. The dragon watched her with what looked like disappointment. Emma knew she had to return to the research station and report what she had found. But as she looked at the small, lonely creature in the crystal chamber, she felt a protective instinct stronger than any scientific curiosity. This dragon was not just a discovery to be studied. It was a living being who had somehow survived when its entire species was supposed to be gone, and now it was alone in a cave, with no family and no one to care for it except maybe her. The dragon followed her partway to the cave entrance, stopping only when the crystal formations ended and the regular rock walls began. As Emma climbed back toward the surface, she could hear that singing sound again, but now she understood what it was. It was the dragon, calling out to family that might never answer back. Emma's hands shook as she uploaded her data files to the research station's main computer. 3 days had passed since she first met the dragon in the crystal caves, and she had returned twice more to study it. Each visit confirmed what she already suspected. This was definitely an astral dragon, a species that every database in human space listed as extinct. The implications were huge, but Emma was scared about what would happen once other people knew. Dr. Richard Hayes called an emergency meeting within an hour of receiving Emma's report. The conference room filled quickly with every scientist, researcher, and security officer on the station. Emma stood at the front of the room, feeling more nervous than she had ever been in her life. The holographic display behind her showed her photographs of the dragon, though the images barely captured how beautiful it really was. Hayes cleared his throat and addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Walsh has made what might be the most important discovery in human exploration history. She has found a living astral dragon." The room erupted in whispers and gasps. Emma watched the faces around her change from excitement to fear as people remembered the old stories about these creatures. Dr. Roberts, the team's historian, stood up first. According to all records, astral dragons were hunted down because of their psychic abilities. They could supposedly read minds and control thoughts. Some accounts say they could drive entire populations insane just by being near them. His voice got louder as he spoke. "Are we sure it is safe to have this thing so close to our base?" Emma tried to interrupt, but Commander Lisa Park, the station's military leader, was already talking. "My first concern is security. If this creature has the abilities described in historical accounts, it represents a significant threat to personnel. Safety, we need to contain it immediately and arrange for transfer to a proper military research facility." Park's tone left no room for argument, at least not from her perspective. Emma finally found her voice. "You do not understand. The dragon is not dangerous. It is just a baby, and it is completely alone. In my 3 visits, it has never shown any aggressive behavior. The psychic contact I have experienced feels more like empathy than mind control. I think the historical accounts might be wrong or exaggerated. Dr. Santos, the team's psychologist, looked worried. Emma, you mentioned psychic contact. Are you sure you are thinking clearly? Psychic influence might be subtle. You might not realize if your thoughts are being affected. Several people in the room nodded in agreement, and Emma felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. They were already deciding that she could not be trusted to think for herself. Hayes made his decision quickly. We will approach this scientifically and safely. Tomorrow, a full team will go to the cave site with proper containment equipment. The creature will be brought back to the station for study under controlled conditions. Dr. Walsh, you will guide the team to the location, but will not be allowed direct contact with the specimen until we determine the extent of its abilities. Emma wanted to argue, but she could see that nobody in the room was going to listen to her concerns. They were all afraid, and fear made people stupid sometimes. She spent the rest of the meeting answering questions about the cave location and the dragon's behavior, but she could tell that most people had already made up their minds about what needed to happen. The extraction team arrived at the crystal caves the next morning with equipment that looked more like weapons than scientific instruments. Emma led them through the passages, her heart breaking as she thought about how the dragon would react to seeing so many strangers with hostile intentions. The little creature had been so trusting with her, so friendly and curious. Now it was about to learn why its species had learned to fear other intelligent beings. When they reached the main chamber, the dragon was waiting in the same spot where Emma had first found it. But something was different. The creature looked smaller somehow, and its scales had lost some of their brilliant color shifting. It lifted its head when it saw Emma, making the same happy chirping sound as before. Then it noticed the other humans behind her, and everything changed. The dragon's scales immediately shifted to dark colors, and it pressed itself against the far wall of the chamber. Emma could feel waves of fear and confusion coming from the little creature. It looked at her with those beautiful eyes, and she felt like it was asking her why she had brought strangers to its safe place. Dr. Martinez, the team's containment specialist, stepped forward with a device that looked like a cross between a cage and a scientific instrument. The electromagnetic field should prevent it from using any psychic abilities while we transport it, he explained to the others. Emma wanted to grab the device and throw it into the cave wall. As Martinez approached, the dragon began making sounds that Emma had never heard before. They were distressed calls, almost like crying. The creature tried to back further against the wall, but there was nowhere to go. When Martinez activated the containment field, the dragon's scales went completely gray, and it collapsed to the cave floor. Emma pushed past the other team members and knelt beside the dragon. The moment she got close, she could feel how terrified it was. The psychic connection that had felt warm and friendly before was now filled with panic and betrayal. The dragon looked at her with eyes that seemed to ask why she had done this to it. The trip back to the research station was horrible. The dragon remained conscious but would not move or make any sounds. It lay in the bottom of the containment unit like it had given up on everything. Emma walked beside the transport, trying to send calming thoughts toward the creature, but the electromagnetic field seemed to block their connection completely. At the research station, they put the dragon in a sterile laboratory room with cameras and sensors covering every surface. The creature huddled in one corner, its scales so dull and gray that it barely looked like the same being Emma had met in the caves. Dr. Hayes and his team ran test after test, taking measurements and samples while the dragon ignored them completely. Emma was allowed to observe but not to interact. She stood outside the laboratory window and watched the dragon slowly fade. It would not eat the food they offered, would not respond to attempts at communication, and would not move from its corner except to avoid the researchers when they got too close. After 3 days, Dr. Santos pulled Emma aside with concerning news. Its vital signs are weakening. Heart rate is dropping, brain activity is decreasing, and it seems to be losing mass somehow. If this continues, the specimen may not survive much longer. Santos paused and looked uncomfortable. The only time its readings improve at all is when you are nearby. Even through the glass, your presence seems to have a positive effect. Emma felt angry and heartbroken at the same time. The dragon was dying of loneliness and fear, and these people were calling it a specimen, like it was not a living, feeling creature. She had to do something, but she was not sure what. The military transport that Commander Park had requested was arriving in 2 days to take the dragon to a secure facility. Once that happened, Emma would never see it again, and she was sure the little creature would not survive much longer away from the only person it trusted. That night, Emma lay in her bunk and stared at the ceiling, thinking about the dragon alone, in its sterile prison. She could almost feel its sadness, even through the walls and electromagnetic barriers. For the first time since becoming a scientist, she began to wonder if some discoveries were too important to leave in the hands of people who saw everything as either a threat or a tool. Emma waited until the night shift changed before making her move. The research station was quieter after midnight, with only a skeleton crew monitoring the essential systems. Security was lighter too, since most of the staff trusted each other, and nobody expected trouble from within their own team. Emma used her access card to enter the laboratory wing, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The dragon was exactly where she had left it that evening, huddled, in the corner of its sterile prison. The electromagnetic containment field hummed softly, and the monitoring equipment cast eerie shadows on the walls. Emma could see immediately that the creature was worse than before. Its scales had gone completely colorless, and its breathing looked labored. The beautiful, vibrant being she had met in the crystal caves was fading away. Emma found the control panel for the containment system and hesitated for just a moment. What she was about to do was direct insubordination, and it would probably end her career. But as she looked at the dying dragon, she realized that some things were more important than following orders. She disabled the electromagnetic field and stepped into the chamber. The dragon lifted its head weakly when Emma approached. For a moment, those incredible eyes focused on her face, and she felt the faintest touch of recognition through their psychic connection. The creature was too weak to move, but Emma could sense a tiny spark of hope flickering in its consciousness. She sat down on the floor next to the dragon and gently placed her hand near its head, not quite touching but close enough for the dragon to feel her warmth. The response was immediate. Color began flowing back into the dragon's scales like water, filling an empty container. Its breathing steadied, and Emma felt waves of relief and gratitude washing over her through their mental link. The dragon made a soft sound, almost like a purr, and carefully moved its head to rest against Emma's hand. The trust in that simple gesture nearly brought tears to Emma's eyes. Over the next hour, Emma just sat with the dragon and let it recover. She spoke quietly about nothing important, just letting the creature hear her voice and know that it was not alone anymore. Gradually, the dragon became strong enough to sit up properly, and eventually it moved closer to Emma, curling up beside her like a cat seeking comfort. It was then that the real communication began. Emma had experienced the dragon's emotions before, but this was different. Images began appearing in her mind, not her own memories, but pictures that came from the dragon's consciousness. She saw flashes of a world she had never visited, with crystal formations that made the caves of Valdris look simple by comparison. She saw other dragons, adults with scales that shimmered like starlight, flying through canyons filled with singing crystals. The dragon was showing her its home. More images followed, and Emma began to understand the dragon's story. Its family had been traveling between star systems when something went wrong. There had been ships, alien vessels that the dragon's species did not recognize, weapons fire and chaos, and in the confusion, the baby dragon had been separated from its parents. The images were fragmented and emotional rather than clear, but Emma could feel the terror and loneliness that the little creature had experienced. The dragon had ended up on Valdris by accident, probably in an escape pod or emergency shelter, that had crashed in the caves. It had been alone for months, calling out with its psychic abilities and hoping that its family would find it. The singing that Emma had heard in the caves was not just random noise. It was a distress call, a child crying for its parents in a language that no other species understood. Emma felt tears running down her cheeks as she experienced the dragon's memories. This was not a dangerous weapon or a valuable specimen. This was a lost child who had been through more trauma than any young creature should have to endure, and instead of helping it, the research team had kidnapped it from the only safe place it had found and locked it in a cage. The dragon seemed to sense Emma's emotional response, because it shifted closer and made comforting sounds. Even after everything it had been through, it was trying to make her feel better. Emma realized that this was what the historical accounts had gotten wrong. Astral dragons were not mind controllers or psychic weapons. They were empaths, creatures who could feel the emotions of others and respond to them with compassion. As the night went on, Emma learned more about the dragon's abilities. It could project simple concepts and emotions to other minds, but it could not control thoughts or force anyone to do anything. What it could do was sense the true intentions and feelings of the people around it. That was why it had trusted Emma from the beginning and why it was so afraid of the research team. It could feel their fear and hostility, even when they tried to hide it behind scientific professionalism. Emma also began to understand why the dragon species had been hunted to extinction. It was not because they were dangerous, but because they could see through lies and deception. Political leaders and military commanders throughout the galaxy had probably felt threatened by beings who could sense their true motivations. Rather than learning to be more honest, they had decided to eliminate the dragons entirely. The dragon showed Emma more memories, older ones that came from the genetic knowledge passed down through its species. She saw images of great cities where dragons and other species lived in harmony, working together to create art and technology that combined the best of many different cultures. She saw libraries and universities where dragon empaths helped resolve conflicts by helping different species understand each other's perspectives. But she also saw the wars that followed, as fear and greed turned the galaxy against the dragons. She watched civilizations that had once welcomed dragon wisdom turn to violence when the dragon's insights became inconvenient. The dragons had not fought back because violence was against their nature. Instead, they had fled to hidden worlds and tried to stay out of contact with other species. By dawn, Emma had learned that astral dragons were not extinct, but they were incredibly rare and careful about staying hidden. The baby dragon's family was probably still looking for it, but they would avoid any areas with signs of hostile alien activity. The research station's presence on Valdris meant that the dragon's parents would never find it as long as it remained here. As Emma prepared to leave the laboratory before the day shift arrived, the dragon communicated one more thing to her. It showed her images of the military transport that was coming to take it away, and she felt its terror at the thought of being even more isolated from everything familiar. The dragon had seen enough of human emotions to know that the military facility would be even worse than the research station. Emma promised the dragon that she would find a way to help it, though she was not sure how. As she restored the containment field and slipped out of the laboratory, she was already forming a desperate plan. She could not let the dragon be taken to a military prison, and she could not convince her colleagues to see it as anything other than a threat or a tool. That left only one option, and it was the kind of choice that would change her life forever. Emma had never considered herself a particularly brave person, but as she watched the dragon fade back into its gray, lifeless state behind the electromagnetic barrier, she realized that sometimes ordinary people had to do extraordinary things. The military transport would arrive tomorrow evening. Emma had less than 18 hours to figure out how to save a dragon that most of the galaxy thought should not exist, while avoiding a security team that was trained to stop exactly the kind of desperate plan she was considering. For the first time since finding the dragon, Emma smiled. It was not going to be easy, but she had something that the research team did not have. She had a friend who could sense intentions and emotions, and who could help her tell the difference between people who could be trusted and people who could not. She was not going to face this challenge alone. Emma's plan was simple and completely insane. She waited until the evening meal when most of the research station's crew gathered in the main dining hall. The military transport had landed 2 hours ago, and Commander Park was already discussing transfer procedures with the transport captain. Emma had maybe 30 minutes before they moved the Dragon to the military ship, and after that, she would never see it again. The service tunnels under the research station were meant for maintenance work, but they also provided access to every major system, including the laboratory wing. Emma had studied the station blueprints during her lunch break, memorizing the routes that would let her avoid security cameras and personnel checkpoints. Her hands shook as she crawled through the narrow passages, but she forced herself to keep moving. The Dragon sensed her approach before she even reached the laboratory. When Emma disabled the containment field and stepped into the sterile chamber, the little creature was already waiting for her, its scales brightening with hope and trust. Emma felt the familiar warm touch of its consciousness against her mind, along with images of the military personnel it had sensed preparing for its transfer. Emma knelt beside the Dragon and spoke quietly. "I am going to get you out of here, but I need you to trust me completely. We are going to have to leave this place and hide until I can figure out how to contact your family." The Dragon tilted its head and projected feelings of agreement mixed with gratitude. Even in its weakened state, it understood that Emma was risking everything to help it. Getting out of the research station was easier than Emma had expected. The Dragon was small enough to fit in her equipment bag, and its natural empathic abilities helped them avoid detection. Whenever they approached other people, the Dragon could sense their emotional states and warn Emma which direction to go. Security guards who were alert and suspicious got avoided, while maintenance workers who were tired and distracted provided safe passage routes. The real challenge began once they reached the outside of the station. Valdres was not a hospitable planet for humans without proper equipment, and Emma had only been able to grab basic survival gear without attracting attention. The Dragon's home cave was too far to reach on foot, and besides, that would be the first place the search teams would look. Emma led the Dragon toward the forest of crystal formations that covered the hills near the research station. The strange mineral structures provided good cover from aerial surveillance, and the Dragon seemed more comfortable among the crystals than it had been inside the sterile laboratory. As they made their way deeper into the crystal forest, Emma felt the little creature's strength returning. By the time the alarm siren started wailing back at the research station, Emma and the Dragon were 3 miles away and hidden among crystal formations that sparkled like frozen fireworks in the light of Valdres's 3 moons. Emma's communicator buzzed with incoming calls, but she had already disabled its tracking function. She was officially a fugitive now, and there was no going back. The Dragon curled up beside Emma in the shelter they had found among the crystals, and for the first time since its capture, it seemed truly peaceful. Emma felt its contentment through their mental link, along with something that surprised her. The Dragon was not just grateful for the rescue, it was happy. Despite everything that had happened, despite being lost and alone and hunted, the little creature was capable of feeling joy simply because it was free and had a friend. Over the next several days, Emma learned more about the Dragon than she had discovered in all her previous research. Away from the electromagnetic interference of the research station, their psychic connection grew stronger and clearer. The Dragon, which Emma had started calling Star because of the way its scales sparkled, shared more detailed memories of its homeworld and its family. Star showed Emma images of a planet where crystal formations grew like living things, responding to the emotions and thoughts of the dragons who lived among them. The dragons did not build cities in the way that humans understood construction. Instead, they encouraged the crystals to grow into beautiful, functional shapes that provided shelter and amplified the dragon's natural psychic abilities. Emma learned that astral dragons were not just empathic. They were natural healers, able to sense emotional trauma and help other beings process grief, fear, and pain. Star's parents had been traveling between worlds as part of a network of dragon healers who secretly helped species throughout the galaxy deal with the psychological wounds left by wars and disasters. The more Emma understood about Star's species, the more tragic their near extinction became. The galaxy had destroyed beings who could have helped solve the very problems that made different species afraid of each other. Instead of learning from the dragon's wisdom, other civilizations had chosen to eliminate what they did not understand. But Emma also learned that the astral dragons were not gone entirely. They had survived by becoming extremely careful about who they trusted and where they revealed themselves. Star's family was still out there somewhere, probably searching other star systems for their lost child. The problem was that they would avoid any area that showed signs of hostile military activity. On their fourth night in the Crystal Forest, Emma made a decision that surprised even herself. She activated her emergency communicator and sent a message back to the research station. Not a surrender, but an invitation. She told Dr. Hayes and the others exactly where she was and asked them to come alone, without weapons or containment equipment if they wanted to understand what they were really dealing with. Emma expected them to arrive with security teams and stun weapons. Instead, only Dr. Hayes and Dr. Santos came, walking slowly through the crystal formations with their hands visible and empty. Star had sensed their approach and their emotional states, projecting feelings of caution mixed with genuine curiosity to Emma. The dragon was willing to give the humans another chance if Emma thought it was safe. When Hayes and Santos reached the crystal shelter, they stopped several yards away and waited for Emma to invite them closer. Hayes spoke first, his voice tired and worried. "Emma, half the research council thinks you have been mentally compromised by the creature. The other half thinks you have lost your mind from isolation. I am hoping you can prove them both wrong." Emma stood up slowly, with Star perched on her shoulder like a living jewel. The dragon's scales shifted through gentle colors as it studied, the two men reading their emotions and intentions. After a moment, Star made a soft trilling sound that Emma had learned meant approval. The dragon could sense that these humans were afraid but not hostile, curious rather than aggressive. Emma smiled at her colleagues. "I can do better than prove them wrong. I can show you what we have been missing." She gestured for Hayes and Santos to sit down among the crystals. "Star wants to show you what astral dragons really are and what they can do. But you have to be willing to let down your guard and trust us." Hayes and Santos exchanged glances, then slowly settled onto the crystal formations. Star spread its small wings and glided from Emma's shoulder to land between the two men. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Star gently touched its tiny clawed hand to Hayes's arm, and everything changed. Dr. Hayes gasped and tears started flowing down his face before he even understood what was happening. Star's tiny hand on his arm had opened a connection that went deeper than words or thoughts. For the first time in 3 years, Hayes could feel his daughter's presence again, not as a painful memory of loss, but as a warm certainty that the love they had shared was still real and still part of who he was. Hayes had lost his daughter to a transport accident before taking the assignment. On Valdris, the grief had nearly destroyed him, and he had thrown himself into his work as a way to avoid dealing with the pain. But Star was not taking the pain away. Instead, the little dragon was helping him understand that grief and love were connected, that mourning his daughter was actually another way of honoring how much she had meant to him. Dr. Santos watched in amazement as his colleague experienced 3 years of blocked emotions in the space of a few minutes. Hayes sobbed and smiled at the same time, finally able to remember his daughter with joy instead of just sadness. When Star finally lifted its hand from Hayes's arm, the research director looked like a completely different person. Emma knelt beside Hayes and spoke gently. "This is what astral dragons really do. They do not control minds or force thoughts. They help people heal from emotional wounds that they have been carrying alone." She looked at Santos, who was staring at Star with new understanding. "Your turn if you want to try." Santos hesitated for a moment, then extended his hand toward the dragon. Star's touch was lighter with him, more like a gentle question than the deep healing it had provided for Hayes. Santos felt the dragon sensing his emotions and memories, but there was no invasion or violation. It was more like having a wise friend who understood exactly what he was going through without him having to explain anything. Star showed Santos images of other species it had encountered through its genetic memories, beings who had also struggled with fear and misunderstanding. The dragon helped Santos realize that his fear of the unknown was not weakness but caution, and that caution could become wisdom if it was balanced with openness to new experiences. When Star finished with Santos, all four beings sat quietly among the crystals for several minutes. Hayes finally broke the silence. "Emma, I owe you an apology that I can never fully repay. We almost destroyed something precious because we were too afraid to see what was really in front of us." Emma shook her head. "The important thing is that you understand now. But we have a bigger problem. Star's family is still out there looking for it, but they will never come near Valdres as long as there are military ships and hostile intentions here. We need to find a way to let them know that it is safe to make contact." Santos wiped his eyes and looked thoughtful. "Actually, that might not be as difficult as you think. If Star can project emotions and simple concepts across space the way it projects them to us, it might be able to send a signal that its family would recognize, like a psychic distress call, but with positive emotions instead of fear." Star chirped excitedly and projected images of agreement. The dragon had been trying to call its family since arriving on Valdres, but its calls had been filled with fear and loneliness. Now, with Emma's friendship and the growing understanding of the research team, Star could send a message of hope and safety instead. The plan they developed was simple, but would require trust from everyone involved. Emma, Hayes, and Santos would return to the research station and convince the rest of the team to help contact Star's family. Commander Park and the military transport would be a problem, but Hayes believed he could handle the political aspects if they could demonstrate that Star was genuinely peaceful. The demonstration happened in the research station's main conference room the next morning. Emma stood before the same group of people who had voted to imprison Star, but this time the dragon was perched calmly on her shoulder, instead of cowering in a cage. The room was tense at first, with several security officers keeping their hands near their weapons despite direct orders not to use them. Commander Park was the most hostile, as Emma had expected. "Dr. Walsh, you are under arrest for theft of alien specimens and violation of security protocols. That creature needs to be contained immediately before it influences anyone else." Park started to move toward Emma, but Star spread its wings and made a sound that froze everyone in the room. The dragon's psychic abilities had grown stronger over the past week, and it could now project emotions to multiple people simultaneously. Every person in the conference room suddenly felt Park's anger and fear as if they were their own emotions, but they also felt Star's response. Instead of matching Park's hostility with aggression, the dragon projected only sadness and a desire to help the commander understand why she was so afraid. Park stopped in her tracks, overwhelmed by the sudden emotional feedback. For the first time, she could feel how her own anger was affecting everyone around her, and she could sense that Star was not trying to hurt her, but was genuinely concerned for her well-being. The experience was so unexpected that Park sat down heavily in the nearest chair. Star glided from Emma's shoulder to land near Park, staying just out of reach but close enough for the commander to feel its peaceful intentions. Slowly, gently, the dragon began helping Park understand that her aggressive response to the unknown came from losing people she cared about in previous conflicts. Star showed Park that her protective instincts were admirable, but that they could become wisdom instead of just suspicion. The transformation took longer than it had with Hayes, because Park had spent years building walls around her emotions. But when Star finally helped her process the grief and responsibility she had been carrying, Park began to cry for the first time since joining the military. The dragon stayed near her, providing comfort and understanding until the commander was ready to speak again. Park looked up at Emma with eyes that were completely different from before. "I am sorry. I have been so focused on protecting people from potential threats that I stopped seeing the difference between real danger and just something I did not understand. She reached out carefully and let Star climb onto her hand. What do you need from us to help this little one get home? The next several hours were unlike anything that had ever happened at a human research station. Star worked with each member of the team, helping them overcome fears and misconceptions while they developed a plan to contact the dragon's family. The plan required converting the station's communications array into a psychic amplifier, using the same crystal formations that covered Valdris to boost Star's natural abilities. 2 days later, Star stood on the station's observation deck surrounded by specially arranged crystals and every member of the research team. The dragon's scales sparkled with colors that Emma had never seen before as it sent its message out across the star systems. Not words or images, but pure emotion. Safety, love, hope, home. The response came within hours. 3 ships appeared at the edge of the Valdris system, moving carefully but steadily toward the planet. They were unlike any ships in human databases, built from the same crystal technology that the dragons used for their cities. As the ships approached, Emma could feel Star's excitement growing through their mental connection. The reunion took place on the planet's surface, in the same crystal forest where Emma and Star had hidden from the search teams. Star's parents were magnificent beings, larger than their child but with the same intelligent eyes and color-shifting scales. Emma felt their gratitude through the psychic connection, along with their amazement that humans had been willing to risk so much to help their child. But the story did not end with Star's reunion with its family. Dr. Hayes and the research team had learned too much to simply return to their old ways of studying alien life. With Star's help, they established the first interspecies empathy center, a place where humans could learn to understand other species through emotional connection, rather than just scientific observation. Commander Park became one of the center's strongest advocates, helping to develop new first contact protocols that emphasized compassion and understanding over military readiness. She often said that Star had taught her that the strongest defense was not weapons or walls, but the ability to see potential friends instead of just potential enemies. Emma remained as the center's director, but she was never the same person who had first discovered a lonely dragon in a crystal cave. Star's family visited regularly, and other dragon healers began making contact with human colonies throughout the galaxy. The astral dragons were no longer extinct or in hiding, because they had finally found a species willing to learn from them instead of fearing them. Years later, when Emma was old and telling the story to young researchers, she always emphasized the same point. The most powerful discovery she had ever made was not a new species or a new world. It was learning that the universe was full of beings who wanted the same things that humans wanted: safety, understanding, and someone who cared about them. The dragons had survived for thousands of years despite being hunted and feared, not because they were strong enough to fight back, but because they never stopped believing that someday they would find friends among the stars. Emma had simply been brave enough to be the friend they were looking for. And in a galaxy that still had too much fear and too much fighting, that friendship had become the seed of something much larger. A new way of exploring space that valued wisdom over strength, understanding over conquest, and love over fear. It was not the ending that anyone had expected when Emma first heard singing in a crystal cave, but it was exactly the ending that the universe had been waiting for.